my collaborators from my political party, just some of them already in jail, some of them just waiting for their for final court decision, also just sitting in jail. That's why that's dangerous. And of course, I didn't want just to live with this risk anymore. And me and my family, we left Russia right after these events.
Of course, we will have to dismantle the overwhelming majority of this terrorist infrastructure, because we say that we want to see Gaza demilitarized. And once we eliminate Hamas, we don't want to see the resurgence of another terrorist group down the road that will use this infrastructure again. And you and I will have this conversation again. So it's a big, big challenge.
Subsequently, we've learned that more than one teacher actually have held hostages in their homes, including some who are parents of children, who locked these hostages away without adequate food, water, or medical care. But of course, the big story in recent days, as you just said, were these 12 or so UNRWA employees who have been found to be directly involved in the Hamas massacre of October 7th.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Backstory. I'm Dana Lewis. This week, Russia. There is a new opposition leader who's been campaigning to run for president against Vladimir Putin. Does he have a chance? Will the Kremlin let him run? Well, it's likely no to both questions, but you never know. We speak to former Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov on the election, the war in Ukraine, and talk of seizing over 30 billion in Russian assets abroad and giving them to Ukraine for weapons and rebuilding. But first, Gaza and Israel's war to unseat Hamas and bring home its hostages taken October 7th. Is Israel making progress in its goal to release hostages and destroy Hamas? In a moment, we'll talk to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokesperson, Tal Heinrich. And when I was in Gaza, the biggest charity organization was the UN Relief Workers Agency, UNRWA. Some of UNRWA's staff were involved in the attack on Israel and even held Israeli hostages. Now, funding for UNRWA is being held by a number of countries because why would they give money to an organization that appears to have worked hand in glove with a terrorist organization? It's a crisis for the UN, says former Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief Avi Meir. But first, that interview with Tal. Tal Heinrich is a spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office of Prime Minister Netanyahu. She joins me now from New York. Hi, Tal.
My pleasure to be joining you, Dana. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Look, 3 weeks, if I can just begin with what's happening on the ground. 3 weeks after the IDF says northern Gaza is cleared, there's fighting in northern Gaza. What's happening there? It's obviously not cleared. And does this speak to the resilience of Hamas?
You're correct. It's not clear of all terrorist elements and terrorist infrastructure. The IDF still has work to do there. But when we said that the area was clear, we didn't mean that it's 100% free of terrorist elements, but rather that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad no longer function as an organized war machine in that area of the Gaza Strip. It's more right now about sporadic attacks, if you will, as opposed to what we still have in the southern parts of Gaza, like in Khan Yunis, for example, and in the areas, the neighborhoods in the central part of the Gaza Strip, where still you have these organized battalions. But in terms of our progress there on the ground, according to the IDF's assessments, we have eliminated more than 9,000 terrorists, arrested 2,300, and really took out the overwhelming majority of the Hamas battalions as an organized war machine. There's still much work to be done, more so when you think about the terror infrastructure that we're finding there.
Can you talk to the Wall Street Journal story where they're saying that, maybe Israel's managed to get only 20 or 40% of tunnels, that there are so many more left. The number 300 miles of tunnel is often kicked around, and I don't know how accurate it is. But it's a hell of a challenge trying to get down there, trying to eliminate Hamas. They're now talking about flooding some of those tunnels with water, the IDF. Yet at the same time, you've got hostages there, and it's mission impossible.
Well, obviously, the plight of the hostages is the top of minds in every decision-making progress, at the Central Command and also on the ground in Gaza. So when we eliminate these tunnels, obviously, we have certain intelligence and now our own assessment to make sure that they're not there. Of course, we will have to dismantle the overwhelming majority of this terrorist infrastructure because we say that we want to see Gaza demilitarized. And once we eliminate Hamas, we don't want to see the resurgence of another terrorist group down the road that will use this infrastructure again. And you and I will have this conversation again. So it's a big challenge. My colleague Elon Levy, you're based in London, right? He says that the underground metro of Gaza is larger than the London metro, which is insane. I myself went with Elon to visit one of these big tunnels, the one that is just 400 meters away from the Erez border crossing in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And Dana, I'm sorry, on the personal level, I wanted to tell you that I was standing there inside this massive tunnel, the one that a vehicle can drive through. And you see how fortified it is. You think of the iron, the cement, everything that all the resources, human work and money that was invested in it, and you think this is insanity. They're so committed to this ideology and idea of obliterating Israel that they invest their effort and their everything in this instead of rebuilding themselves. And I was there and I was thinking exactly sort of what you said. Well, wow, this is huge. This is massive. And this is just one. It was just one.
So the question that I saw put to former Shin Bet chief Amy Ayalon today was, is Israel winning? And he said, I can't say that because we don't know what the end game is. So how do you spell victory at this point?
We spell victory once we achieve the 3 goals that we have set forth for this operation, for this war that we didn't start and we didn't want. We said that Hamas must be eliminated as the ruling governance body in Gaza and as an organized war machine, as a military wing. When exactly this will happen and what does it entail? Will one terrorist still be alive or we manage to eliminate all of them? This is a decision that will be, of course, decided by the military brass of the IDF, by our government. And we said that the hostages must come back home, all of them. That will be, of course, one achievement.
Let's hope those poor people get out of there. And you can only imagine what people have gone through over 100 days being held, abused, tortured. Some are already dead. So that brings us to this discussion that there's a hostage deal in the works. But Prime Minister Netanyahu, your boss, stood there yesterday and said, we're not going to release thousands of Palestinian prisoners, despite what the negotiations may be in Paris between, the USA and France and Qatar and others. We're not going to release thousands of terrorists. Who was he speaking to there? It sounds like he was almost speaking to the Americans, saying, don't pressure us into a deal that we can't accept.
Well, when the Prime Minister of Israel is speaking right now at the height of a war, I guess he's speaking to everyone around the world, not only Israelis, but I can tell you who he was speaking to today, and that is families of hostages. And he told them that the Israeli government, he himself personally, they're doing everything possible to examine every possible avenue to bring to the release potentially of more hostages. Now, we know that what created the conditions back in November, Dana, was the military pressure that we exerted on Hamas on the ground. We were hitting them very, very hard, and the terrorists on the ground, they wanted a breather. And so we had this framework which saw the release of some of the hostages. It has to be a combination of the diplomatic avenue that we don't expand on for very obvious reasons. We don't really discuss these terms openly, publicly, because these are sensitive issues. Human lives hang in the balance. But we are really doing everything possible to create the conditions, to create another framework that will see the release of more hostages. And you're right. We heard from the accounts of hostages who came back in November after 50 days or so in captivity. And it's unbelievable to try to imagine what these who are still there for more than double the time are suffering through, including sexual abuse that we know for certain is taking place there with some of the female hostages, because that's what one of the female hostages who came back told us.
Will you comment on the
happen.
fact that at least one of those hostages, maybe more, were not only taken by members of UNRWA, the UN Relief Workers Agency, but in fact, at least one of them that was released, I think among that 50, came back and told stories about how he was held by an UNRWA teacher, how he wasn't fed, he was held in horrible conditions, and now you have revelations that there's at least a dozen UNRWA employees were involved in the October 7th terror attack inside Israel of killing people, of taking hostages.
This is outrageous. I mean, to people around the world, many of them say, well, this is unbelievable. But to Israelis, this is nothing but, a surprise. Israelis have been used to it, have been speaking about it for years, how UNRWA is somewhat in bed with terrorism and preaches to terrorism in UNRWA schools. You know that a Telegram group of 3,000 UNRWA teachers celebrated the massacre. You had teachers that Israel passed this information on to the UN agency who participated as part of the Hamas massacre. They crossed into Israel. Some of them, the ones who weren't in Israel, helped Hamas secure ammunitions for the attack and secure logistics for the attack. One of them was involved in kidnapping a body of a soldier, another of a kidnapping of a hostage. So we know of at least 2 hostages right now who were held by UNRWA people. And it's not a bug in the system. It's a feature of this system. And the mere existence of UNRWA is flawed to begin with, Dana. The fact that this agency exists in an unprecedented way, dedicated to the so-called Palestinian refugee problem, which in its essence, if you boil it down, the existence of UNRWA is basically to put a question mark over the existence of Israel, to keep Israel as some temporary entity in the mind of Palestinians by telling them generation after generation, you are refugees of wars that you started, and until when? Until Israel will cease to exist. So UNRWA is flawed on so many different levels, but really what we revealed was just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, I know UNRWA is also in charge of giving out food and water, and support for UNRWA eroding now, it comes at an impossible critical time. And I guess there'll be a lot of discussion about, if you replace UNRWA, what do you replace it with? But very quickly before I let you go, Hamas has gained popularity in the West Bank, as has Islamic Jihad. There are great fears by the Israeli security establishment of attacks that can occur just like the one October the 7th from Gaza into Israel could happen from the West Bank into Israel. Are you worried at the Prime Minister's office that the threat is increasing, and how do you stop this popularity of Hamas in the West Bank now? And where is Fatah? Where are the moderates?
That is a very good question, because when you look at internal Palestinian polling of their own population, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, you see that in the West Bank, 85% of Palestinians support the October 7th atrocities. They support Hamas's doing, which really makes you, think of what the future could be like. And this is why we say that down the road, once Hamas is eliminated, we want to see Gaza demilitarized, but also the Palestinian society as a whole, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, de-radicalized. Because without that, and you're in Europe, so you know better, without de-radicalization of extreme elements in the society, we can't have peace. We can't. And you reported that Israel has made peace with many other Arab nations because conditions on the ground were right for it when the timing was right. But processes have to take place. And unfortunately, some of these processes take time. But we hope that once we eliminate Hamas and we deal terrorism such a major blow as it deserves, moderate voices will fill in the vacuum, and that the Palestinians would understand that terrorism will always be a dead end. So why choosing it?
It was a feature of the Oslo Accords, Tal, and many believe that even with the best peace process in place, unless you de-radicalize Palestinians and stopped celebrating bus bombings and suicide attacks, the violence would never stop, and it never did. And Hamas jumped right in there and led that charge in terms of terrorist attacks in Israel. So what you speak about, has been just isn't looking forward, but it's also leaning back and looking at what went wrong also in the 90s. So Tal Heinrich, spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Tal, good to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Dana.
Avi Meir is the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, and he joins me now from Jerusalem. Avi, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you as well.
Look, this controversy with UNRWA, Canada, the US have paused funding to UNRWA, so have 7 other countries. I think as we count now, UK, Australia, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Finland have taken similar action. Is it fair, or is this a slight overreaction right now?
Look, UNRWA has been a problem for many years. Some would say that it dates back to its very foundation in the aftermath of Israel's War of Independence in 1949, when it was granted this mandate that is quite different than that of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Whereas the UNHCR is tasked with the resettlement of refugees and essentially ending the refugee status, UNRWA exists to perpetuate the refugee status of those Palestinians who it serves, which is why you've seen the number of Palestinian refugees or people classified as Palestinian refugees balloon over the past 75 years to millions and millions around the world, including those who required citizenship in their current places of residence. Over the past 20 years or so, various different organizations have raised concerns about all sorts of ties between UNRWA and terrorist groups, as well as UNRWA's own operations, which are viewed as being tainted by incitement to violence, the delegitimization of Israel's right to exist, anti-Semitic tropes, and so on and so forth. For many years, there have been all sorts of charges about UNRWA's ties to Hamas, that it can only operate in Gaza because it's in cahoots with Hamas in many respects, that many of its employees are in fact Hamas members. And in fact, that has come to a head during the current conflict. Just a few weeks ago, when I was still at the Jerusalem Post, we published a report that was first circulated by an Israeli journalist named Almog Boker, that one of the hostages in Gaza...
If I can jump in, because you've packed a lot in there, but that's really that post that you put up is what led me to ask you for the interview, because you wrote that an Israeli who had been held hostage in Gaza, he was the captive of a teacher employed by UNRWA, and that UNRWA later on turned around and slammed your report at the Jerusalem Post, essentially saying it was ungrounded, unfounded. How dare you? What did they say to you?
They said exactly that, that they had not been presented with evidence. These are unsubstantiated allegations, and they requested very strongly that we remove the report from our website.
You got it wrong.
Did not comply.
You got it wrong, because you only said there was one.
Right, exactly. At the time, we only knew of one.
There's now at least a dozen UNRWA employees that have been named, and that has been provided to the White House, as well as a number of countries. So you didn't get it wrong, but you spoke about one case, and I know that I shouldn't inject any humor in what is a very serious situation. But the fact is that in fact they got off pretty lightly in your story compared to what's come out now.
Yeah, I mean, look, subsequently, we've learned that more than one teacher actually have held hostages in their homes, including some who are parents of children, who locked these hostages away without adequate food, water, or medical care. But of course, the big story in recent days, as you just said, were these 12 or so UNRWA employees who have been found to be directly involved in the Hamas massacre of October 7th. About half of them are themselves teachers, which is astounding when you think about it. Others have other roles within the organization, but they played an active role in kidnapping, massacring, transferring weapons to Hamas on the day of the massacre. And one report that just came out a short while ago by the Wall Street Journal said that according to an intelligence estimate, about 1 in 10 UNRWA employees in Gaza are somehow linked to terrorist organizations. That's about 1,200 people. So in the aftermath of the first revelation about the 12, we were hearing many critics saying, how could you judge an entire organization based on the actions of only 12 people? Here we see we're talking about 1,200 people, which is about 1 out of every 10 employees. That is an organization that is entirely compromised and requires substantive reform.
So I want to explore that a little bit with you. I mean, the U.S. National Security spokesman John Kirby said today it's serious, but you shouldn't impugn the characters of 10,000 employees across the region that UNRWA is operating in.
Look, that is certainly Admiral Kirby's prerogative. I think the situation is much deeper than that, and we've known it for many, many years. This is an organization that is tainted from the very core of its mandate. Its previous director has said explicitly that it has a political mandate and that we can't do anything about it. We just operate within the confines of that mandate. But if the mandate itself is wrong, if it is just perpetuating the problem, which is what it's doing, then perhaps the mandate needs to change or the organization needs to be dismantled and the refugees handed over to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and their status made equal to the refugees of any country around the world. I think that is probably what we need to explore, perhaps not at this moment when UNRWA is doing important work in some respects in Gaza, caring for the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian population there. But at some point in the future, a reckoning must come, and the organization needs to either reform or be totally dismantled and be absorbed into another body.
What's the alternative? I mean, I've been to Gaza hundreds of times as a correspondent over the years. I'm sure you've probably been there. The UNRWA hands out, I've seen them handing out, water and powdered milk and rice. And I mean, they're a frontline aid agency. They are in an environment which is run by Hamas. Obviously, some people are going to get into the organization no matter how good your screening is. But I don't want to give them the benefit of the doubt either. And I want to ask you, do you think that they completely not only failed in that respect, but turned a blind eye to what was happening in their organization, how deep Hamas was infiltrating the organization, using the organization maybe as a front and to protect the Hamas military wing?
Look, according to former UNRWA officials, there are no pre-employment screening procedures in place. They essentially will hire pretty much anyone. And so, yes, we know as a matter of fact, up until this point, and this was admitted by former directors of the organization, that there were Hamas members. Now we know that it's at least 1 in every 10 members of their team who are somehow affiliated with either Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or other terrorist organizations. That is profound. That is an organization that has a very deep-set problem. And so you asked what the alternative is. I think the alternative is very clear. Move the Palestinian refugee problem to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which deals with every other refugee case around the world. The Palestinians are the only group that has their own...
What would that do?
I'm sorry, what's that?
What would that do if you move
the UN High Commissioner for Refugees is an organization that has a budget in the billions, that deals with millions upon millions of refugees around the world, and it simply is not tainted in the same way that UNRWA is. It is an organization that is unfortunately tainted to the core. It has been compromised for many, many years, and it simply needs to either reform and do so seriously with an independent investigation, looking into what all those problems are and how they can be addressed, or dismantled and absorbed into UN High Commissioner of Refugees. I don't see an alternative.
Where do you think we're headed right now? I mean, in Jerusalem, there was a conference last night that had a lot of right-wing members of Netanyahu's cabinet in there, including Ben Gvir, who's, former Kach member, and they were dancing around the idea that they relocate Palestinians out of Gaza. I mean, is that not beyond extreme? Do Israelis support that, do you think? Or do you think that that is gaining momentum within Israel?
I think the overwhelming majority of Israelis are horrified by the notion of any return to Gaza on a permanent basis. The notion of resettling Jews in Gaza, I think, is one that is entirely foreign to the vast majority of Israelis. What you saw at that really unfortunate conference in Jerusalem last night, which, as you said, was indeed attended by members of this government, was a display of extremism that is highly unrepresentative of Israeli society. What Israelis want is to live in peace and security. That can only be achieved when the hostages are brought home and Hamas's capacity to ever carry out a massacre like October the 7th is dismantled. That is the goal here. The goal is not to repopulate Gaza, and I hope that we're able to achieve those goals very soon.
How does it end? Is it military reoccupation of Gaza? I mean, if you don't bring settlers back, is it continued military occupation of Gaza, which may go on for years? And do you, like behind the scenes, what are you hearing? Do you think that there is momentum for an international effort now to bring about some kind of Palestinian self-rule in Gaza that will replace the extremist group Hamas and get them out of them?
Look, there are various proposals being floated at this time. From what I'm hearing, it is likely there will be some kind of Israeli presence in Gaza, at least till the end of the current year, until the end of 2024. It will not look the way it does now. There'll probably be far fewer troops actually on the ground, but Israel will maintain the capacity to come in and deal with terrorist activity as it resurfaces, as it almost certainly will. As for longer-term arrangements, we've heard various conversations about a multinational force, perhaps populated by Arab states in the Gulf, coming in and taking responsibility for security of that territory. But yes, certainly we would want to see some kind of Palestinian self-rule reemerge in that territory, one that is not tainted by terrorism like Hamas or by association with terrorism as the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank currently is. What that looks like remains to be seen. There are various different proposals floating about. We certainly hope that that's something that can be effectuated as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, what a big remain to be seen chapter that still has to be written, right? So anyway, Avi Meir, the former editor-in-chief of Jerusalem Post, great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Mikhail Kasyanov is a former prime minister of Russia, and now he lives in exile in Europe. And Mikhail, welcome. I use that term, and you can correct me, in exile, sort of precariously, because you left Russia willingly when the war happened in Ukraine, but now you probably cannot go back.
Absolutely, I cannot go back. That's why I left Russia when they started to adopt just legislation under which they can put in jail just people for criticism. And we have a number of examples. And my collaborators from my political party, just some of them already in jail, some of them just waiting for their for final court decision, also just sitting in jail. That's why that's dangerous. And of course, I didn't want just to live with this risk anymore. And me and my family, we left Russia right after these events.
It has to be emotional. I mean, you're a patriot. You worked next to the president. I mean, you worked in the Kremlin. You worked for the country. You rose to one of the highest ranks in terms of the political the political landscape in Russia. You then fought as an opposition person. Suddenly, to be saying that you're a foreign agent and cannot go back to your country, these are dark days.
That's absolutely strange, and it took them a year to decide whether to name me as a foreign agent or not, because just there was the information that even in September last year, 2022, where already just my name was put for consideration, and it took them a year to make a decision whether maybe they were waiting permission of Putin, so that whether it's possible to name former prime minister who worked with Putin his first term just as a foreign agent. That is absolutely strange. Of course, foreign agent, that is some kind of bazaar, just because these people in the power, Putin's team, if we can call the team, the circle, they believe that critics of Putin's regime could be the crazy people or foreign agent. That's what they chosen for me, just foreign agent. Yeah, and that's what already just more than 200 people and more than 300 of different organizations named as foreign agent, just for criticism of Putin, for criticism of the war. Yes, they're correct. I'm condemning the war. I'm criticizing Putin. Just I work. I'm part of Russian anti-war committee. That's what they also just incriminating me that it is dangerous organization because we're against the war. All these facts, and as a result, just a strange name, but it is the fact. The law they produce this way, that foreign agent. That is, we are not foreign agents. We're agent of our country, of our motherland. As I said, we're of course the patriots of our country, and would like much better. We're good for the country, but it's good for the country in Putin's mind. That's completely different. His people believe that their enrichment and their ruling and they keep the power, that is the good for the country, but not as us and other many millions of Russians who believe that we should live in a prosperous, I would say, civilized country, part of Europe.
Do you know Boris Nadezhdin, who is now attempting to run against Putin for president, and what would you say about him?
Oh, what I can say, just the most important thing, just what I have to stress, that he continued to keep anti-war position and openly discussing this and describing this, not in a very, I would say, direct way, but very clear with the more delicate manner of describing this as a crucial mistake or something like that. And I think, and I'm almost sure that he will not be registered for the second part of the run. Because of this position, because just people would like alternative. They don't know who Nadezhdin is about, but they would like to vote for the person, whatever person is, who against the war, who wants to stop this war as soon as possible. Nadezhdin right now represents this opinion. That's why there is a growing popularity of him, and I am sure that they will not. I mean, Kremlin, Putin will not take this risk to register him for the final round because just people could definitely could go to the voting stations and put their ballot. But of course, the result will be predictable. Putin would win. But the risk that people, and a lot of people, including many officers, military officers, and from the police, they would understand. They voted against that. But result could appear just as Putin wanted. That would create a public risk and a risk of I would say demonstrations, protests on the streets. I don't think Putin would take this risk. That's why Nadezhdin will not be registered.
Do you think it was a mistake by the Kremlin to let him get so far now because it's become quite public, or do you think that they wanted to create the atmosphere of a democracy, even though we know that these elections are not democratic?
That they wanted to create atmosphere of democracy, but they don't care much about that. But in fact, there was nothing as I would say potential methods to cut him from on this stage. Just simply to put in jail just for criticism, but they didn't do this, and they wanted that some kind of landscape to appear that many people and that they would like the outcome just visiting just polling stations would be high. That's why they thinking this way. They didn't know that Nadezhdin will continue to have such anti-war position, and people would continue to support and demonstrating their will to put signature for his registration. And I think that is already just they run too far.
You think it's getting away on them, that it's getting out of control for them?
Yeah, no, not getting out of control, but much more difficult for them and much more risky for them as they expected.
What happened to you when you tried to run for president? Because you were very organized, and you traveled the country. You had a real grassroots organization. Parnas, and you had local election offices. I mean, tell me from your experience, what do they do to you to stop you?
Yeah, correct. And that time, that was completely different time. It was almost democracy existed, and at that time, we all believed that there was a chance. There was a chance to change, not to allow Putin to go this route what we come now. Just nobody could expect at that time that where we could come. But in that time, there was of course, as you correctly mentioned, that political party just was organized, and we were prepared for this, collecting the signatures, and I travel all over the country. But they didn't expect, the Kremlin, they didn't expect that my popularity would start to raise so rapidly within 1 month of collecting signature. From my rating was 6%, and in 1 month it was 18. And they understood that at that time was not Putin, but Medvedev was running from Putin's team. And at that time just was absolutely dangerous, and it was a great risk. And I believe just we potentially could have won those elections as a general support basis, on the basis of a general support. It didn't happen. They cut me on that stage. What as they going to do this?
They tried to say what, the signatures weren't valid. The people who supported you were not real people, fictitious signatures. I mean, they did everything they could to stop you, right?
There were 2 million signatures, and they say 170 they don't like. And out of this 170, 35, they believed it was not put by real people. But it was just technical reason. But of course, everybody knows what actual political grounds were for that. Yeah.
You're sitting in one of the Baltic countries, which sit in great fear of what's happening in Ukraine right now, that they believe that Europe and America are going way too slow on weapon supplies, that we're reaching a dangerous precipice where Russia will continue, just not in eastern Ukraine, but they will threaten other sort of NATO frontline countries. What is the mood where you are, and what do you believe, if you were to take a snapshot historically of where you think we are and where we're going, what would you say?
You are correct that in terms of Baltic states, people here and the politicians in particular just very much concerned about that, because they understand how just how Putin hates these countries and the people of these countries. And that's why just, of course, they have all reasons to think this way, that if Ukraine will be defeated, it means just next step would be Baltic states. And they don't want to be unprepared. That's why just they're very nervous and asking other NATO members to support them. And I think just the NATO members just doing this. But in general, talking about Ukraine, but I believe that all these, I would say, mass which we take, I don't think just we correct word, but what was going on in the US right now, just in terms of not agreeing on adoption of the support or package, the support for Ukraine. But I know I talked to politicians of both countries then just half a year ago, and all of them just there is a bipartisan consensus on the support of Ukraine. But internal problems, internal disagreements, just blocking this support. But unfortunately, it has already has an effect on the situation in the front. In Ukraine, and all, of course, the information and I would say the landscape provides that some kind of fatigue come, and European countries just will not be so actively in support. But I talked recently to European politicians, that there is also absolutely great consensus and the readiness to continue support Ukraine. That's what we need right now, as soon as possible. Positive decision in the US. I'd like to believe it will be soon, although I'm disappointed that didn't happen in December. I thought as soon as the Congress will reintegrate just the process. Now it didn't happen, but I'd like to believe they will make the decision soon. European Union on the 1st of February going to make this decision too, and I'd like to believe that Ukraine would feel just very solid grounds and continue to defend themselves, their sovereignty.
Because what will Putin do you think? I mean, do you think he's content to keep eastern Ukraine, maybe some expansion along the Black Sea coast? Or do you think that his goals are much broader than that?
There was, of course, much broader. The goals were much broader. But right now, I think just Putin already switched the war for war and attrition. He managed during 1 year to switch Russian economy on a military stance. And in fact, just those production facilities which were left for decades after Soviet Union collapse of the Soviet Union, now just they reintegrated all those production, and they produced a lot of ammunition. Or maybe not on such a, I would say, high-tech quality, but that is a lot of things, and it's 10 times quantity, 10 times bigger than Ukraine can use just right now. That's why just they believe that competition of potentials, economic potentials and human potentials, Putin, he believes that he would win. That's what also he believes that fatigue already come, and just expecting that Donald Trump will win elections and then just reconsider attitude to supporting Ukraine. I think all these factors, combination of these factors, and he will wait. I don't think that he's going to have another offensive operation in spring, as some people say, because just he already have also facing internal problems, and there will be more growing problems in the economy and financial system in Russia. But of course, he believes that he will win the war of attrition, competition of potentials. He believes that West will fed up of supporting and allocating so much money, and sooner or later they will press Ukraine to sit down and to accept Putin's terms of capitulation.
What do your European, contacts? I know you talk to politicians a lot, and you talk to people in the EU. What do they say about a possible re-election of Donald Trump as president, and the dangers to not only Ukraine but a wider NATO and European Union? And what are they doing to prepare for that? Do you think that they are preparing for a Trump presidency as best they can, whether that be domestic weapons production, or will they continue to support Ukraine and go it alone, just Europe and Ukraine, if the US pulls back?
That's an interesting question, but it is, of course, better to ask those European politicians. But my impression is that, of course, they are very much concerned about that. Knowing what happened in the past, especially relations with the European Union and all the sanctions and quotas, etc., and barriers in trade, and also problems within NATO. That's what, of course, people already know just how to tackle these problems here. But of course, talking about Ukraine, that's the most important issue. European Union without United States would not be capable to support for such extent so that Ukraine could win this battle. But nevertheless, I believe, and the European politicians also believe, that if even Trump, but assuming that Trump is a president, but in any case, he couldn't have a consensus and to get just everything settled in Congress. But as I said, bipartisan consensus of support Ukraine exists. And it's strong, this, but the technicalities. But I think that will be adjusted somehow. We will see a lot of negative talks and a lot of populistic talks, but that will create delays. That will create a problem for Ukraine. But in general terms, I think that would be maybe not at such scale and not such direct way support as current administration provides for. But I think that will be, in any case, transatlantic unity continue to exist in terms of supporting Ukraine.
Last question to you. There have been a lot of people campaigning, especially people like Bill Browder and others, campaigning for Russian assets that were frozen, both in the US and in Europe, to simply be seized now and turned over to Ukraine, especially given the fact that there are the delays in funding coming from the EU and coming from the US. Do you think there's a danger in doing that, or that would be a wise decision to turn over frozen Russian assets in European and American banks to the Ukrainians?
There are two types of those assets. one of them private assets. I mean, just not different, call them oligarchs or whatever, billionaires, whatever stuff. Yeah, it is completely different things that should not be seized of in any case in terms of just because they don't condemn the war. That should be different consideration because it's private property. That's untouchable thing for existing of the world order existing right now. And that should be consideration individual basis on what is origination, etc., etc. I think they're doing this. But other part of assets, the central bank, international reserve central bank, $300 billion US. That is a different thing. That's what discussion is going on about that. The main problem, what I expect now and see, of course, everyone is concerned about just whether such a step, if those assets are seized, whether it's create a problem of destroying the whole financial system existing right now, IMF, World Bank, all these situations, just different organizations with supporting countries, etc. Because since today,
yeah. and also the whole monetary system of seeking haven in the U.S. dollar suddenly.
So that's what I also mean about that too. Yeah, that is since this time it never happened. Never happened.
If should it now?
It could destroy the whole mental attitude to this monetary system. But what it could be used, and I believe just they're trying to work out a model, just to have it as a pledge for the potential loans to Ukraine, so that for reconstruction of the economy and et cetera, et cetera. But then on the later stage, when Ukraine wins and Putin defeated, and that will be a different discussion. But right now, I think there will not be possible to have such a tough step and to seize these assets and to create a precedent, which will be widely discussed in the whole world and would create a negative effect for international monetary system.
You're not a fan of doing it.
It's not the right question. I see the problems. I don't want the world order will be I would say destroyed. Putin already tried to destroy just international security system. He already just on this. But if we already just to add to them destroyment of financial system, that what will have in the end in this world. Building everything in the beginning and from the stretch, that will be very difficult and will be a mess in the whole world. We already see just some problems in the Middle East and Ukraine, Russia, and just other in Africa, etc., etc. But where we can end up, that is difficult way.
Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov, always good to talk to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana.
And that's our backstory this week. Share the podcast if you like it, and we'll bring you more. I'm Dana Lewis. Thanks for listening to Backstory, and I'll talk to you again soon.